Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Roger Royce. Welcome to the webinar, one of a series of many that we're doing here during the sheltering in place rules. Today's webinar is COVID-19 and investment in health tech. We're probably going to focus a little more on investment in health tech and where the new opportunities are, what people are investing in, what people ought to be focusing on. Again, I'm Roger Royce. I'm the founder of the Royce Law Firm, and a couple of weeks we are going to be part of Haynes & Boone, an international law firm with offices all over the world. We represent technology startups for full service formation, financing, commercial contracts, M&A, and now with our new alliance, we're going to have a presence throughout the world. So our panel today is a group of local investors and VCs who are here through idea to IPO to talk to us about how investment in health tech may have changed as a result of recent events and what opportunities are available and what you might be looking for. A couple housekeeping items. This is one of a series. We do this every week, so you can tune in, look at the idea to IPO website if you want to see upcoming presentations. During this presentation, if you have any questions, if you'll notice at the bottom of your screen, there should be a little toolbar with a dialog box. It says Q&A. Use that to ask questions. Don't use the chat box. That might not look at that. Use the Q&A if you have questions. We're going to have our panel presentation for about an hour, exactly an hour. And then for the next half hour, we'll open it up to questions. So go ahead and type your questions in as we go along. I'll save them up and we'll get to them at the end of our presentation. So before we start, I think what I'd like to do is ask our panelists to go ahead and introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about who you are and how you come to the space, and then we'll launch right into it. Why don't we start with you, Steve?
Okay. So I am the chairman and CEO of FounderSpace. We are an incubator and accelerator located in San Francisco, but we also have other offices around the world. We do a lot in Asia, especially in China, South Korea, Taiwan, Australia, and a lot all across Europe. So I have been investing in startups and incubating and accelerating startups for years. And prior to that, I did 3 of my own venture-funded startups. So I have a lot of experience in this, and I really love it. I love working with entrepreneurs. I also authored 2 books. The first book is Make Elephants Fly, which is published by Hachette worldwide. And it's all about how startups innovate and come up with new ideas. And the second book is Surviving a Startup, which is about to be published by HarperCollins. And it is what the title says, How You Survive a Startup. So I look forward to talking with you today. I work with a lot of health tech startups here in the US and all over the world, and I will share my opinions.
Okay, thanks, Steve. F?
Sure. Ephraim Lindenbaum, Managing Director of Advanced Ventures. We are a Silicon-based venture fund, and I'm actually a recovering entrepreneur. So I've sat in your chair many times as first a CEO and an operator, and then ultimately an investor. As an entrepreneur, we were in the larger media space, grew a company here in the Valley through the 90s, exited the first .com boom, not to date myself there. But we were very active as a media participant on the side of healthcare. And then as an investor here over the last 20 years, we've invested in health tech as a whole category. Today, very much active in digital diagnostics, IoT, as well as the broader health and wellness segment, which includes both nutraceuticals, nutrition, as well as food tech and ag tech.
Okay, thanks. And Aldo? You'll have to unmute your mic.
Yep. Sorry. My name is Aldo Carrascoso. I actually wear 2 hats today. Primarily, I'm an entrepreneur. I've started a number of firms, all of them unrelated, but very much related to problems I really care about. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Intervent Biosciences. It's in precision medicine. But then at the same time, I'm also an active angel investor. My last investment was made 3 weeks ago on something that's actually been influenced by COVID very positively. So I'm happy to share both insights from the entrepreneur who is running a pretty cool company at the same time looking at deals and leveraging on other people's networks of diligence and all of these things.
Okay, well, thanks very much. Well, let me just kind of start out with a bang here and kind of hit what's on everybody's mind, and that is whether angel capital and venture capital has dried up or is about to. Just this morning, while I was waiting for this webinar to start, I saw one of my deals stopped, and I had that happen again yesterday. Today was surprising because it was a health tech company. So I guess my question is there money still available? Are health tech companies going to be immune or not if we are going into a downturn and people not investing or being reluctant to? And what can we expect? And whoever wants to start off with that, I guess I'd like to hear each of your perspectives on this because you all each come from kind of a different angle to this space. Any volunteers? F, why don't you start us off?
Sure, happy to do that. Well, I think in the immediate term, everybody's trying to get their arms around the situation. As a venture capitalist, we're spending a tremendous amount of time with our portfolio companies, making sure they're making right decisions. Some of them are pivoting, some of them are growing, some of them might be, laying off or right-sizing staff to increase their length of burn, things like that. So we're spending a lot of time in that. In our particular case, we have some exciting things happening. One of our food tech diagnostic companies that was in the ag and food testing space is very rapidly pivoted to COVID. They're doing some incredibly cool stuff with multi-pronged tests, environmental testing, aerosol testing in the broader COVID space. So it's super exciting. They're working with the CDC, BARDA, which is sort of the DARPA of the CDC side, to bring in both grant money as well as rapidly, cruising through FDA approvals and things like that. We have another very interesting food and agricultural decontamination company, which is right now in testing to provide a solution for decontaminating PPE, more particularly the N95 mask, to allow the healthcare staffs of these hospitals to reuse and decontaminate these masks so that you're not putting on the same mask over and over. So there's some very exciting stuff happening in our portfolio. Now, that being said, that keeps us a little further away from looking at fresh deals right now. However, we are getting deal flow coming in from a lot of our partners, other VCs. I think that's probably where we're spending most of our time. A number of those VCs are looking to shore up some of their existing investments. Some of them have pivots like ours that are getting very exciting and look for more capital. But I think the overall issue is that we've got a number of different initiatives from the government that are most specifically going to affect this digital health, health tech, healthcare space. Particularly, there's $500 billion or more in the stimulus specifically targeted at the hospital space. Most interestingly, we just exited our telehealth company in the end of December, and that company has grown approximately 10x in the last 30 days. So, sadly, we exited with a good win there, but we would have had a home run had we waited a little bit longer. So I think at the end of the day, there's going to be a lot of fresh capital coming into the space to acquire technology, which means on the venture side, we need to continue to fund these companies.
Okay, so F, just before we leave you, so I guess what you're saying is you're not looking for a big downturn in investment in health tech companies. You think new companies coming in, there's new opportunities, there's new technology that's going to require capital, and that capital will be there willing to invest. Is that right?
Yeah, certainly. I think this is really a key of the value proposition these companies are bringing. If this is a near-term opportunity, if there's a big opportunity involved, there's definitely going to be significant amount of capital in the chain here, maybe not over the next 90 days, but over the next 12, 24, 36 months to continue to spur investment in the category.
Gotcha. Steve, what's your perspective on this?
So I feel like this COVID-19 situation isn't going to go away quickly. It's going to take longer than some people expect because it will have long-term implications on the economy as a whole that just won't vanish overnight. It's not just the US economy, it's the entire world economy. Countries like China, one of the engines of the world economy, has been extremely hard hit, even though they seem to have the COVID-19 situation under control. We don't know the actual data. It's hard to know if the data is entirely correct. And it doesn't mean as soon as things open up in China that the virus won't return. especially in the fall, which has happened many times before with the influenza. So I don't think this is a short-term blip, but I do, things always will resolve themselves over time. But it really, the world economy is one entire system that we're involved in. And we can't really separate the US from the rest of the world, and it's going to impact us for some time to come. Especially if you look at third world countries, second world countries, they're going to have a much harder time than the US and China of dealing with this situation. Now, in my opinion, there are, it's funny because I work with a lot of startups overseas, all over the world, and especially in China, where we have our incubators and accelerators, and literally have a huge network there. And every day somebody comes up to me and asks if I want to buy masks. They're like, do you want to buy some masks? We have a factory, we're making masks. And I'm sort of getting sick of it because I can't gauge the quality of their masks. They all say, oh, it's been certified and this and that, and they just want to sell you something. So it's a crazy world out there right now. I am hopefully we can get this under control. I think we're taking the steps necessary now, and I look forward to things improving dramatically this summer. And that is my outlook on the overall situation. Specifically, I'm not working with any companies that are directly making products like respirators or masks or other things that will affect hospitals right now or the situation right now. Although almost every company I'm working with has had to adapt to the situation.
But Steve, so on the other side of that, you have an investment fund as well. Are you still investing? Do you see any slowdown in that, or do you think it's going to be business as usual, just a different business?
I think, I definitely think there'll be a slowdown. I already see it. So I see entrepreneurs, they're contacting me. They're having more trouble than they were raising capital. And this is only the beginning. It's going to get more difficult. Now, that said, there's still a lot of money flowing into VC funds here in Silicon Valley. A lot of funds have raised record amounts recently. So they have to spend that money, but they're going to be more cautious. And what being more cautious means is that, especially with early stage companies that are much more fragile, that haven't proven their product market fit, that don't have customers and growth, they're going to have more trouble raising money. When people get cautious, and in any time of crisis and uncertainty, investors are people, and all of us get more cautious. Whether we'll admit it or not, we become more cautious. And we are still investing, of course. We're looking for opportunities, but I think it will not be like it was last year or the year before or the year before. It's going to slow down. How much it slows down is really hard to say, but already, my partners around the world have slowed down their investments. Startups are still closing money. So ones that kind of got the process started before COVID-19 really hit the US, they're closing their rounds now, and most of them are going through because they were so far along. But anybody who's at the early stage of raising money now, you're going to be up against some high hurdles.
Yeah. Aldo, how about from the angel perspective, the same sort of thing?
Yeah, so I'd love to echo my colleagues' different perspectives here, because I think I don't know if you all remember Black Swan Week, which was 3.5 weeks ago, where basically the Dow was hemorrhaging 2,000 points, over many days. And I think since then I saw it both from an angel investment perspective and at the same time as an entrepreneur, because what I did was I reached out to all of, of course, our insider investors into my of my company, and then at the same time, those who were interested in taking us to the next level. And then the third one were the deals that I was looking at. And you could see, from those three different perspectives, you can actually see that, what my colleagues basically were telling you, all right, a bunch of the funds that, that were friends of mine, that were insiders, they were triaging, right? They were telling me about the green, the red, and the yellow. So they spent, I think they spent a considerable amount of time shutting everyone out, but really figuring out which are the specific portfolio companies that need to be, beefed up, fixed. How do you extend runway, so on and so forth. So for those of you that are thinking of fundraising right now, I think this is still one of the struggles right now for a lot of the folks, because I was hit up by a lot of the syndicates I'm part of if I wanted to double down on some rounds. They basically say, there was this article that was sent to me, I forget if it was Wall Street Journal, but it basically said if your startup was worth 100 million 1.5 months ago, right now it's worth half of that. So, valuations have really taken somewhat of a nosedive. But and some of the deals that I was actually part of, we were given the opportunity to actually pull out because the terms changed, or if you wanted to double down your investments, it was because the valuations, it was smaller rounds, better valuations. And again, I think from the perspective of now being an entrepreneur also, the interest in investing in companies like what I do is because, it's the business fundamentals. What is pre and post COVID strategy look like? What are the important implications of the technology you provide, after, when the dust settles? It's not if, it's when. So, I think, just echoing again my colleagues' comments, there's a tremendous amount of activity that's happening, but funds are I've seen two types of funds, ones that are still triaging themselves, and then the other ones that have figured out and who are now, finding out what new normal is. If all partners meetings used to be in person, now it's on Zoom. Are they comfortable with that? So it's standard operating procedures, but there has been a tremendous amount of funds that raised billions of dollars right before the end of the year. And they have a lot of that dry powder. And a lot of them are trying to figure out how much of that do we deploy on our current portfolio? How much of that do we deploy new opportunities? And sometimes they won't. So for people who are thinking of fundraising right now, actually, I'd love to hear my other colleagues' perspective of that. So,
well, in 2008, there were some funds that actually gave money back to their investors. Said, never mind, we're not going to go forward with this fund. I don't know if you remember that. Is it that bad?
Well, I think it remains to be seen. I mean, we're 4, 6, 8 weeks into this at this stage. Implications on the supply chain in China, as one of my colleagues said, it still remains to be seen there. I mean, I think, to take this down from a macro to a micro level, I mean, this panel is really around health tech. And I think one of the most interesting spaces to be investing in right now as an investor, and whether that means you're writing a check today, tomorrow, 3 months, 6 months, 9 or 12 months from now, is really understanding this market. And I think my advice and or answers to entrepreneurs at this stage is this crisis has really exposed tremendous amount of opportunity, which are broadly looked at as flaws in the system. When you have a flaw in a system, that is a startup opportunity as far as we're concerned. So this is really everywhere from hospital bandwidth to security. Certainly materials, a lot of issues around contamination, spread, things like that, certainly bed counts, respirators, all kinds of different issues have been broadly exposed, never mind supply chain issues, software tech issues, etc., all across the healthcare space. So as an entrepreneur, I think the most important thing to look at is if you've been working on a deal for a long time, a startup for a long time, maybe raising some money if you're in that angel or early stage, pre-customer driven, to take a really hard look at it and say, is this technology, is this startup able to maybe, let's say, for example, fix these holes which have now been discovered in this space. There are a lot of opportunities in this chaos which are coming up. I mean, we're seeing this in lots of categories that were, frankly, not very exciting. I mean, bandwidth, communication, security companies are getting a lot of traction. Healthcare across the space. I mean, we're seeing all kinds of opportunities. So I think our standpoint is, for about a year now, there's been a pretty big flight to quality from what we've seen in the VC side. And that means customers, proof, no more back of napkin kind of deals. And, I think that's been in place now for about a year, maybe even 18 months from our perspective. In our case, we have these underlying requirements in doing deals. So for us, if you don't have customers, we're not writing you checks. So from that standpoint, I think, not a lot has changed. We're really sitting back. Once we've triaged our existing companies, we'll start to look for these big gap opportunities, big green fields for people to be able to dig into. Now, the angel space, I would be much more concerned about. There was a lot of capital floating around from angels, predominantly because they had seen massive gains in the public markets. Everybody felt wealthy. My experience, having gone through these kind of downturns, both as an entrepreneur and now as a venture capitalist, is the place that's most impacted by these downturns tends to be the angel market. And when people don't feel as wealthy, they aren't writing checks. When they're concerned about their own personal net worth, they're not extending these opportunities. That's very different on the institutional or large family office side. They've made decisions about where this capital needs to go into their alternative asset categories, and will continue to do so.
Have you seen companies actually stepping up and doing new things and responding this quickly to these new opportunities? Has that been happening?
We have. We're getting incoming on a number of our companies from both funds as well. We haven't done a round, at this stage. Right now, a lot of our companies are taking in, either CDC, NIH, or what they call BARDA, which is the advanced side of CDC grant money at this point. Non-dilutive funding is king always. So we're spending more of our time there. These new opportunities are creating the opportunity to bring in capital to take advantage of this. We are getting incoming on that. I've been getting incoming pings from other, venture colleagues of mine at other funds that have a company that's doing very well, taking advantage of the situation, so to speak. And I don't say taking advantage, really, making the most of this crisis opportunity and adding value places. And they're raising capital for their companies, and some are very interesting.
How about the rest of you guys? Are you seeing that as well? Are you seeing companies actually coming up with new products that are responsive to what's going on?
To a limited degree, I do. I don't, you can read about it online, everybody from Elon Musk and others, innovating on new types of respirators and things like that. Most of the health tech startups that I work with are really focused on their core products. And some of those core products are now being used to solve some of these problems that people have. So one of the companies I have been working closely with is a company called Teamy Robot. And they make robots that work in hospitals that actually the robots are designed to do a few different things. One of them, and probably the most useful in this case, is they're designed to get equipment, supplies into to doctors in the operating room and around the hospital. So the robots will go, and it's all automated. They'll go, they'll pick up the supplies, they'll come back with whatever the doctor needs. Saves nurses and other people time, but especially in this situation, where there might be staff shortages and there may be risk of contamination and people getting exhausted, having robots do the work 24/7 can be a very good thing.
Yeah, that's a great example of a great solve. I don't know where that company is, both in terms of scale and ability to move into market now, but that sounds like a great opportunity. Send me that deck.
Okay.
Well, let's drill down a little bit on some of these. I've been hearing a lot about digital medicine, for a long time. I suppose it's even more important now if doctors can actually communicate remotely with some of their patients. I'm just wondering if those sorts of companies are getting more traction or more attention now. Any of you seen that?
Yeah, as I was saying in my little intro there, we have a very exciting telehealth company called SnapMD. which was ultimately acquired by a private equity fund in December of last year. Just to let you know, we're getting emails all the time that they're having to take down their systems and upgrade bandwidth. Unfortunately, Microsoft Azure, which is where they were basically operating off of, was not able to provide enough bandwidth. That's how many customers they're adding at this stage. I think what's also exciting is at this stage they can no longer do self-provisioning. They're basically saying they've unleashed self-provisioning. Any hospital in the country can basically come in and they will send a bill at end of month for usage. So it's that exciting. They've gone from prospecting to order taking to automated onboarding. So I think, that's super exciting. There's all kinds of different categories there, all the way from mental health to, some of the specialties that are, at least for the near term, going to be limited in patient, accessibility. That gets very, very exciting. Things can be done over telehealth and other types of remote monitoring.
Did you have a comment about that, Aldo? You look like you wanted to say something.
No, I actually also angel invest in a lot of ex-US opportunities. I'm from the Philippines, so I do support a number of telehealth startups in the Philippines. And I think the biggest issue in investing, I think it's still a great idea, but the biggest issue always comes down to bandwidth. As you may very well know, in the United States, we do enjoy developed world speeds, but we actually did a number of still trying to help. I think my two investments there that do the telehealth, it's essentially using SMS. Exactly what they did in I forget that country in Africa, basically, that they basically used the SMS protocol to transmit information that allowed patients to be triaged correctly. Because I think in these developing locations, the ratio from a physician to a patient is much lower than we have it here in our developed society. So they rely on a lot of these healthcare workers, who basically are the first lines of defense. And right now, that application has, I'm not going to use the word blown up, but that application has just clogged the SMS networks. So there's definitely, there's definitely a lot of opportunity in telemedicine. It's now really a question of, how do you apply that in places where it's where the infrastructure is lacking. And this is, trying to advise a number of these companies also. Some of them are in my portfolio, some of them are not in my portfolio, in trying to figure out really interesting ways of, of utilizing whatever infrastructure is found in those places. So I think in the United States, right, perfectly ripe for. I've not seen or have invested in the deal here, but it sounds perfect.
I also have am working with startups in the telemedicine space, and one of them has a very interesting platform that actually enables doctors to guide experienced doctors to guide less experienced doctors through procedures that they wouldn't, that they haven't performed as many times. So, and it allows them on demand to a less experienced doctor to actually call up a more experienced doctor, like a more experienced surgeon, in the middle of an operation if they run into a complication and need hands-on help right at that time. So I thought that platform is really interesting, because there are a lot of doctors out there, but there's a much smaller number of doctors who have really deep experience, especially in certain surgical procedures that are needed, and especially when it comes to complications that don't come about very often. So that's one startup. I have another startup that is working on training remotely doctors. So they have more experienced doctors training other doctors remotely using their platform. And these telemedicine things, I think there's so much room for this in the future.
Yeah, Steve, as I hear you talk about those companies, it just kind of makes me wonder if COVID-19 is just going to suck all the oxygen out of the room. It seems to me there's probably only so much money. It sounds like less now going into health tech generally. And if everybody's rushing, it's sort of a gold rush, isn't it? If everybody's rushing to solve the problems that F had identified, Fram had identified, hospital shortages, masks, ventilators, all this stuff. Is that going to be bad for the kind of companies you're talking about because there'd be that much less capital available for them?
In the short term, yes, but these problems will be solved, and they're getting more masks, getting more ventilators. Overall making the hospital system more efficient is a much broader problem, which involves a lot more technologies and a lot more opportunities. So the very specific problems are going to be short term, and those are going to be resolved. Or they won't be resolved. They'll be papered over, and then we'll experience them again. But either way, I don't think they're going to suck up all the venture capital, because a lot of those short-term problems, the problem with them is a lot of venture capital won't be going into it, because we and a lot of healthcare dollars, it's a short-term blip. Venture capital, when we're investing in a company, we're looking out at 10 years. We don't want an occasional virus that comes around. If our company relies for its business model on a virus that comes around once every 10 years or longer, it's not a very good business model. We have a long period where we're not going to be making a lot of money. So all these, masks and ventilators, yeah, they'll make some money in the short term, but they're not going to be great investments for us. So they're not going to take, we're not going to be investing in that. It's like a short-term opportunistic thing or humanitarian thing that people will do, but it is definitely a side thing for venture capital. I'm not even looking at that. What I'm looking at is a business over 10 years. How can you make hospitals more efficient, safer, allow new procedures, have a higher cure rate, all these, extend medical care. That is what I'm looking at, and I don't think that's going to change.
Yeah, and I think my conversations and personal experience with current investors right now suggests that I think COVID was actually a very, it's actually a very, it's a wake-up call. And what's interesting, it's someone phrased it as the easiest way to educate the public of stuff that they need to know, like their healthcare. So this, when the dust settles, the fearless forecast is healthcare will be top of mind, whatever sliver that is. And, the two things that have been found that are super applicable right now is precision safety and precision nutrition, right? So those are very, very interesting. Like, for example, right now.
Can you talk more about that precision safety and precision nutrition?
Yeah, so precision safety essentially is, you don't want a blunt instrument telling you if you have COVID or not. Like you want an instrument that informs the physician of who needs to get triaged. It's a triaging tool that basically allows a physician, are you going to the ICU? Should I send you home and isolate yourself? Because right now they do that symptomatically. So precision safety essentially is, there are a lot of, if you notice, I don't even know how many drugs right now are in the pipeline. I think there are 10, correct me if I'm wrong, that are directly targeting COVID-19. The adverse reactions, cytokine storms, people have no idea how to do this, especially with those potential. So precision safety essentially is the ability to, inform the operators of a trial, the operators that prescribe a drug, of adverse effects. So that's one. Precision nutrition is, there's, and these are for the ag tech and the food tech funds that I work with and I talk to. The importance of understanding your self-immunity and how that is important in understanding and battling the disease. There's a tremendous amount of I think it's PLOS papers that suggest that a lot of people that are asymptomatic but are carriers are the ones with, with a specific phenotype. And how do you understand what your phenotype is if there are no tools that can do that? So I know, and I think some of the deals that I'm seeing and some of the things we're doing are very much in line with that.
Interesting. Okay. Steve, I'm going to come back to you. I remember it was about 20 years ago, about the time I met Ephraim, that I was putting together a medical device fund. I remember the founder said to me, this will probably be the last medical device fund that ever exists, because biotech is just going to take the space and we won't need devices anymore. And here we are 25 years later, and it's still a pretty big sector. But biotech is certainly a big thing. And I know, Steve, you're real excited about CRISPR. Can you talk a little bit about that as an opportunity? And I guess it's part of HealthTech. I would include it as to what you think the future of that might be.
Yes, I would definitely include it in HealthTech, biotech and HealthTech. I think that the potential for CRISPR is enormous. And we have to remember, CRISPR hasn't even been around that long. As a technology, most technologies like the transistor, they took 25 years before they really were commercialized and became a big deal. CRISPR, it's been less than a decade, I believe, since it was invented. And already it has had a massive impact on everything, from, new cures for cancer. I read about it daily. If you go online, it's unbelievable what people are able to do with this, and and even more importantly, what the potential is for the future of healthcare. Now, that won't say all of these solutions work. It won't say it's not risky. We've seen a lot of controversies around CRISPR, especially in China, with the babies whose genes were altered to help them resist HIV, which was a very irresponsible decision by that doctor and researcher. And he, for all of you who haven't kept up with the story, he's now in jail. So please don't go down that path if you're an entrepreneur. It was, we really don't know. The tools are still pretty crude, honestly, when it comes to healthcare for CRISPR. We don't know the long-term impacts of modifying people's genes. But when it comes to people who are critically ill, they have late-stage cancer, they've exhausted all other treatments. At that point, the risk is worth it, because that person, they're going to die without it. So we should, allowing them to experiment with this new technology is not a big ethical dilemma. In terms of CRISPR's near-term potential, we're seeing a lot more in the area of farming, agriculture, ag tech, but that's another discussion entirely. In terms of the medical benefits of gene therapies and everything, I've been reading up on some really cool ones which deal with longevity. They're doing gene therapies now. They have, and it's also very controversial. They've, one company recently moved their trials outside the US. They moved them to Colombia because the standards are a lot lower there. And they're charging, I guess, very wealthy people $1 million a pop to try this gene therapy that they say could extend your life. I don't know if you'd be that foolish enough to buy into that, but that's how they're funding it. And there's other startups that are more reputable. I just read a study from Stanford that said they actually know how to. They've actually figured out at Stanford how to reverse age cells. So to take cells and actually bring them back to their nascent state when they were young again. They have done this in lab tests, and they believe that it will work on. They're pretty sure it will work on humans. The key is you can't bring the cell all the way back to its original state, because then it becomes like a stem cell. It has no identity. So if it's your liver cell and it suddenly has no identity, it doesn't know what it is, it's no longer a liver cell. But they have found a way to actually mitigate that and stop it at a midpoint where it still knows what it is, but it's much younger. So for all of us here, I know myself, I'm hoping they develop that quickly, because I'd love to be my 20-year-old self again. And I would love CRISPR and other genetic genome technologies to play a part in this. And I would just say there's a lot of potential for this. You can see that if they can get this working, there are going to be a lot of unicorns out there created through this new technology. The hard part for us being investors is figuring out which ones will work and which ones are just kind of pipe dreams. A lot of these experiments that work on animals do not work on humans. I mean, they seem great. It will work on rats, it'll work on rabbits, it'll work on, sheep, but humans are very different. And it's not a given that when something works on an animal, and you read about this a lot, that it's going to translate into human health. And it'll take time for us to figure that out.
Yeah, well, you've kind of hit on something kind of interesting there about longevity. I mean, that's a real issue. I mean, science is getting really good at making people live longer, but not as good at curing diseases, right? Which again is an opportunity, especially for the device companies. So, Frame, you've been so quiet there for so long. What's your view on biotech? Is that something you get involved in at all yourself?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we play a little more on the food and agricultural side of biotech. We stay out of the broader drug delivery side. I mean, I think we view biotech today as kind of wet and dry bio. Drug development, some of this deep R&D that we're really talking about here is a little far afield from us. We don't have MDs on our team. That's just, we're not smart enough to really do that. I think from our standpoint, we're really looking at, near-term opportunities. What excites us there is data analytics. Certainly there's a lot of hardware solving big problems. I mean, we are all about finding big problems that are solvable today. Oftentimes, we tend to look at 3 to 5 year exit trajectories, ideally for our companies. We often tend to look for that ultimate, light at the end of the tunnel when you invest, meaning if you can't see 3 or 4 potential acquirers for this inherent technology, the day you invest, we're probably not investing. So when you think about robots that deliver supplies in a hospital, that's super interesting. When you think about, sanitation, decontamination technology, there's lots of challenges through the entire hospital system. And I think what's interesting, and I think one of my colleagues said it best here, is the level of attention that's going to come to that category, ideally when we get through this, is incredibly high. The level of pressure that's been on our hospital system to squeeze out profits at the expense of available hospital beds, available resources, that is going to change. And more importantly, the government has put $500 billion out there for these hospital systems, and they are going to be looking to spend this money to shore up those holes. So when we talk about remote physician training, remote physician support, resource allocation, supply chains, all of these things are going to become very, very meaningful. $500 billion is a lot of money to spend, and our hospital systems are going to have this capital available. Certainly they're going to burn a lot of the capital in these early phases of COVID mitigation and so on. Hopefully that's a short story, but it most likely won't be, and most likely this is something that's going to wrap around again, whether it's this fall, next fall, etc. And as long as the hospital systems are kept on guard for these kinds of pandemics, which are now going to be considered top of mind for global governments, getting solves are there. And to the point that one of my colleagues mentioned earlier, venture capitalists, we're not in the operating company business. So making masks, making ventilators, those aren't things that are maybe top of mind for folks like us. What is very interesting is there a software story that in combination with splitting a ventilator makes existing ventilators much more efficient? There have been some great folks online that have figured out, how to split these ventilators, not only into 2, but even 4. The missing piece of that story is actually the software. These are medical respiratory, physicians that have figured out how to kind of, if you will, hack these machines to allow them to do this. The piece of the story they can't fix is the software tech in there, which is a great and easy solve for, really not a high-tech startup here. So being able to get technology out there, to be able to do a flash ROM upgrade to some of these pieces, these are big near-term opportunities, but also long-term opportunities. When you start looking through the hospital supply chain, there are so many holes there, and it's a huge stimulus product. And you can't disregard that. I mean, going back to the Al Gore started the internet story, the reason why we have the scale of the internet and e-commerce and everything else we have there is because a number of things the government did in terms of subsidies, in terms of tax breaks, and so on, that really spurred that development. we can look back at all of the historic sort of technology booms going all the way back to World War II. I mean, the reason why we're even having this conversation computer-wise is because money that was spent on radar and communication technologies during World War II. So at the end of the day, I think startups really have to look at it and say, can we find real problems that are actionable today? Are these things that can get on radar in hospitals? And I think the biggest challenge to startups is today is going to be on the customer facing side. How do you get the attention of the hospital systems? How do you get attention of your buyers? How does this rise to the level of urgency that says, we're going to stop, stop down from putting out fires or dealing with immediate need situations and consider this. So those are things that are really important. Physician training, anything that's remote monitoring. If you can, for example, our telehealth company has remote monitoring with IoT involved. That's why they're getting hit. Mayo Clinic doesn't want people that are on heart and other types of monitors coming back into the clinic where they can be infected with coronavirus. If you can monitor that remotely, that's a huge business. There's tons of IoT, there's tons of other tech out there now that makes that possible. And I think entrepreneurs that are in the health tech space need to broadly look out at the market and say, how's the development in cost reductions in things like IoT, in things like enterprise tech, in terms of bandwidth and so on that are broader? To one of my other colleagues about international investing, for the most part, we are, exclusively US investors. A significant, amount of the Silicon Valley venture capitalists are, a famous venture capitalist once said to me, when we run out of new deals in the United States, we'll look abroad. We're still really the center of innovation. I think, encouraging the entrepreneurs that are on the call today to really look at this crisis, find opportunities there, and then put their teams behind solving those quickly are things going to be able to develop, both market share, there's available capital, and ultimately the venture folks will get behind you.
Okay. Yeah, everybody should be looking at that stimulus package. There's a lot of stimulus money available, especially SBA loans for startups that wasn't before, because the rules have loosened up now. I want to circle back to something you touched on. It was on my list to talk about. I'm surprised we hadn't gotten to it yet, but it was about data and products that are using data and artificial intelligence, in fact, in health tech. That seems to have been the hottest thing. One of the biggest investment sectors, according to the Price Waterhouse study last year, was AI. So anybody want to comment on that, products that use data in health tech and artificial intelligence?
Yes, certainly. I mean, we've looked at a lot of deals. We haven't done any specifically just because we felt many of them were still a little too deep down the developmental stage for us. However, we are seeing the value add there. We've looked at startups that are essentially using AI, machine learning to rapidly process, different drugs, which are, for off-label use. I know a great researcher at Stanford that's been using AI and machine learning to find drugs for example, to attack Lyme disease. He's identified certain antibiotics that have been, sort of out of the common use case for 20 plus years in combination with other, other therapies that can really fight Lyme disease. I think, this whole issue around Corona where, hexachloroquine, and I think the CEO of Novartis just yesterday has a video floating around that. These are all things that are coming out of big data and analysis and, being able to speed data. I mean, even the models the government is currently using to project the spread of this all is coming out of big data, AI, and implementation across the hardware and healthcare chain.
Aldo, have you doing any investments in data companies?
Yeah, around 80% of the decks that I now get are, it used to be 100%. Now it's 80% of the decks I get have AI in the word, and a very good example of that is I do get involved in some deals where they look at drug delivery systems, and they say that they use proprietary high throughput images to make sure that the drug delivery works. And then when you go deep into the conversation, you realize that it's a very it's not straightforward systems biology. It is of course understanding the different processes, but then I find that the overuse of the word AI is still there. There's definitely a lot of companies that put AI on their deck even though they don't need it. I was very early in something called the blockchain. So that back in 2011, and when we were talking about blockchain, it was still illegal then, and it took my company 9 months to get a bank account. So, and then now everyone has a blockchain, which I think is it's difficult for some folks to really peel. Especially when they're doing diligence on some deals, what is AI, why do you need to put AI into your workflow? Why is that important? And, why, what are your classifiers? What are your machine learning algorithms really doing? I mean, are they an essential part of the value system that you provide? So, but, I think one of the most impactful things of, just true neural networks, for healthcare, I think, is the multi-omic approach. And essentially the multi-omic approach is looking at the different omicses in our lives, which is one is genomics, the other one is the transcriptomics, the other one could be the proteomics. There are many different types of omicses. If you actually look at the different analytes that you find in human biology, there are dozens. And I have not seen a deal. Well, I've seen some deals that actually that they mix proteomic and genomic information. Interestingly enough, I've seen deals that look at mixing clinical annotated data with, so it includes dosage, outcomes, treatment with some molecular information. And those things, I think those applications really require massive amounts of compute power. I've seen one deal that's actually looking at, it's very interesting. They actually need to use quantum computers because they work on actuarial systems, essentially in trying to understand, they work with insurance companies and the actuarial teams of these companies, and they try to do highly predictive models based on they're creating odds ratios. So this is when quantum computers are required, but then a classic computer can't do it. So there's a tremendous amount of opportunity there. But again, it's really, it has to be grounded on a specific use case, asking yourselves why, I always ask myself, why does this company need AI? Are they making the next shiny object? Are they defocusing from what needs to be done? But I think multi-omics is one of, true multi-omics, meaning, the piercing of the different omics in biology and how that integrates with clinical information. That I think is a sweet spot.
I'd like to chime in there
Sure.
on data. So if you aren't already aware, you should check it out, what Google's DeepMind is doing. I mean, they're doing some amazing stuff. They have an algorithm now that gathers data and can tell doctors when a kidney is going to fail, exactly when, 48 hours in advance. They have another application that can look, that uses AI, and from a single heartbeat, they can tell somebody if they're at risk of having a heart attack. And the cool thing about the AI is that it sees things humans don't. A human may listen to the heartbeats, but they can't detect these things that an AI can detect. So those are just two examples, of what Google is doing that have enormous potential. But if you look across the spectrum, you can apply this technology to virtually all diseases and all conditions and gather a lot of data and gain a lot of insights that currently we don't have, to like chronic fatigue, making all these correlations to Lyme disease. There's so much potential out there for this technology. The problem, as the others alluded to, is, there are issues around who has access to this data and what they do with the data. And we've already seen problems. Actually, Google got slapped in the UK for how DeepMind got slapped, and the head of DeepMind had to leave the head of their health group because of the way they were using data. They were getting data from hospitals and they weren't using it with the right permissions from the patients. So This data is very powerful and can be used for a lot of good things, but there's also privacy concerns and patient rights concerns, and we still have to navigate that both here in the US and globally, how that will work.
You know, Aldo, you said something I want to get back to, blockchain in healthcare. I remember 2 years ago, that was all the rage because, you know, it was a perfect application for, you know, for our healthcare system because it's so complicated. There's so many steps. You know, I remember hearing about, you know, unique digital IDs, you know, identification of the physicians as well as the patient history on the blockchain. Has all that happened?
So I have a very dated perspective on the blockchain. Remember, I was mining Bitcoin. I'm not going to admit when I did that, but let's just say I started my first blockchain Bitcoin company in 2012. And I thought that blockchain was perfect for two things. One was proof, like proof. Well, it's no longer irrefutable because now chains have fragmented. But more importantly, I think the transfer value. So for me, I think my message is consistent that outside of those two applications, this is controversial, so I just have to warn you, use a database. And the reason is I've seen some of the most complex, I've actually architected some of the most complex blockchain systems. One of the first ones was a company I founded called Veeam. It does B2B money transfers. I think we're considered the first one, first use case in that. And then I've actually invested in another blockchain company, but they do B2C, which is, I think, very important. Again, all in payments. But when it comes to digital identity, I think the blockchain, there are different types of protocols, different type of applications. I've seen applications where it's titling. I've seen applications where it's medical records or decentralizing your medical records, so you could start, you could monetize it. I have actually a good friend that I have two good friends that are doing that, and I think those are great use cases. And you don't hear from them because they're well funded. You'll hear from them when they have their product out, or when their white papers have become made public. But yeah, I mean, those are the two things really. It's proof of something, and then the other one would be transfer value. So I think in terms of healthcare, I have not seen a compelling, a super compelling use case outside of decentralizing ownership of your, EMR information, so your electronic medical record information, and allowing other people to you can actually monetize that information. So you can free it up. It's HIPAA compliant. It's kept clear. So all of these necessary applying. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is Zeph real quick. I mean, I think at the end of the day, a lot of healthcare is governed by things like my colleague was just mentioning, HIPAA, et cetera. And, there's always a very challenging disconnect between innovators on the startup side and reality on the customer side, right? And I think a lot of that comes down to bridging the gap, right? Solving a problem in a hospital, whether you do it with blockchain or anything else that's in the box, doesn't necessarily matter as long as you're solving a problem. I mean, we had a panel a couple of months ago around the AI dynamic. We had an exit in the AI space in 2004. This is not the first coming of AI. This is not the last coming of AI. I think at the end of the day, technology is about solving problems. And if AI makes it go faster, if blockchain's the best solution, to a customer, it's a solving of a problem. We used to joke that our company used to have little gnomes inside of the box, not AI that did the job. And, it was the same thing to 90% of their customers. It didn't matter. So I think from our standpoint, we really have to look at this as a broader issue around digital adoption, solving real problems. In fact, take a look at our Twitter feed. Every 24 to 48 hours, there's a new tweet coming out in the digital health space. What we're thinking about, I think our tweet in the last 24 hours was, will this coronavirus crisis essentially, speed adoption of digital technology in the digital health space. That's super interesting to a lot of, our companies, a lot of my colleagues in the later stage venture market. How is this going to impact? And those are the things that I would encourage you to follow us on Twitter or LinkedIn. We're always posting about this, and there's probably a few articles we'll find before others, and you'll get a good chance to understand what we're thinking about in the space. It's less of, is there the word AI in your pitch, and more of, is there a customer in your pitch that says, I need this solution now?
Okay. All right, well, let's take a few questions since we're at 1 o'clock. So first question, we have an entrepreneur who is hoping to create a novel patent pending software to complement epidural stimulation devices well, that's very specific, to enable patients paralyzed due to spinal injury to regain most, if not all, mobility. Bootstrapped, pre-seed. He says, what do you recommend for us? And I assume what he means is with respect to funding. Anyone want to comment on this? You guys can see the questions, right?
Well, I will tell you what I would recommend. It sounds incredible. I would want to see some proof, right? I'd want you say, what can it actually do for a patient? What proof do you have? Do you have testimonials from patients where it's worked? Do you have a third-party study that can validate your claims? Those are the most important thing. What's the research behind it? Where did it come from? A lot of startups, they can say whatever they want, but as an investor, at the end of the day, we need to dig deeper. And so that would be the most important thing for me to then take the next step and actually consider investing.
Yeah, we don't do human health, so sorry, I can't add much to that part of the conversation.
Yeah, I can see. I mean, if that works, that would be a really big thing, wouldn't it? So I could see how you might want to do your diligence on that. Okay, next question. My startup invented a device that can detect COVID-19. It measures wide panel for general wellness. We have a prototype MVP. What funds should I approach? Can you name a few, especially local? We are at Series A. So you guys interested in investing at Series A in a device that can detect COVID-19?
So we do have a company that's building a multi-pronged test. It's not just COVID. It's also influenza, A, B, MARS, SARS, etc. That's very deep in the health chain. Our company has over 100 labs that can with hardware on board to test it. It really depends. I mean, surprisingly, spinning up COVID tests are not very challenging. Spinning up great COVID tests are very challenging. It would really depend on the platform they're trying to use. Everything from microfluidics to PCR to qPCR. Our company uses microarray. Whether it's quantitative or not. I mean, there's so much data in there, number one. Number two, there's also, I think, a couple of layers of COVID. So, there are certainly funds out there. If you've got a good test, you should get in touch with CDC, NIH, and BARDA. I mean, those are the places where they are, able to fund companies that do this. I'm probably getting 10 decks a day with companies with COVID tests.
Yeah, that's my opinion too. I ditto. I think, like I said previously, COVID is a short-term thing. It's hard for a venture fund with a 10-year outlook to invest in that. It's more like you would want to get government money to fund that, unless, of course, you had a broader offering. So you were testing for future influenza strains and you had other value to bring to the table, then it gets more interesting for venture investors.
Yeah, so I actually have a layered thought exercise for anyone looking at this, and I think it's really helped my company and the company that and the companies that I help with. So you have to understand the journeys. So one is the patient journey. So these are stakeholder journeys: patient journey, the physician's journey, and the institutional journey. So when I say patient journey, you're talking about what does the patient experience, and which part of that value chain can you solve a problem? Are they getting triage in are they not getting triage correctly? Are they being sent home? Are there too many false negatives? So that's one. for the physician journey, a perfect example right now is how are they triaging, how are they finding out severity of cases? Right now, older age and pre-existing conditions are the ones that basically put you on top of the risk ladder. So what is the pain point that a physician feels right now? And on the institution, it's basically how to optimize, they're probably looking at bed optimization at this point. They're probably looking at different parts of the value chain that have nothing to do with, COVID, but more like how do we make this more efficient? And I think when you understand how your product fits in that kind of a 3-layer cake, you figure out that I think it'll allow you to really figure out what the true value proposition is. Because right now, if you go, if I know the truth, I see a lot of the COVID decks, and then our syndicate groups, what they get is this thing is not, you're gonna go against, I forget that company in Santa Clara. You're gonna go against
Okay.
Exactly. What is the question is right now, what, so I just gave you 3 value chains, and within each value chain, which ones are you going to solve for? And if you have one that solves a specific hot point on the 3 layers, then then it sounds like something that's very important. So I spend a lot of times with physicians. In fact, we have 2 epidemiologists on staff, and I think we work with at least a dozen on a daily basis, and their perspectives are very different from the institutional perspectives, right? And very different from the patient perspectives now, right? Because patients are coming into the hospital, and if you're young, you would think that you would be not at risk, but then there's a tremendous amount of anecdotal evidence right now that suggests that even younger people, ages 18 to 35, are getting hit by the like severely hit by the by COVID-19. So these tools, don't think they exist. Again, the tools right now are blunt instruments, yes or no. What you want to know is, okay, should I send this person home, right? Should I send this person home? And again, this is from the value chain of a physician, not a value chain from the individual.
So this is F. I'm just going to jump in real quick because we have funded physician-led startups. I'm a huge opponent of bringing physicians into that cycle. It's almost like letting your kid go to the candy store and pick out the stuff versus making higher level decisions. And oftentimes, very very rarely are physicians the customer in this case. So I just push back a little bit in terms of talking to your physician friend who thinks it's a great idea. Because the buyers in most cases is not a physician. It's on the administrative side of the hospital side, and it's on public health side. So I just push back a little bit. I think it's great to get that opinion, but I would be cautious about letting too much of that guide a startup's opinion.
Yeah, but I think health economics. I've done a number of health economic studies, and the physician voice, there's a quantitative and then there's a qualitative. They actually put a lot of weight, and then when you start presenting that to payers, I can go very technical because this is exactly what we went through with my current startup. The physician's voice actually is a very good way of understanding, how our health. There's a thing in precision diagnostics called health economics, which is something you present to like a Medicare or Medicaid or one of the 300 payers to show that your test is valuable. And I think one very important input of that is the physician's voice. So just putting a number of caveats.
Yeah, opinions are great. I mean, I just, and they're certainly good to guide, but when you get to the business side of the story, often, if not, universally, physicians have a very hard time matching the economic story with the use case story. So, I'm just trying to make sure that your physician friends are not helping guide your startup wisdom too much.
All right. I think the physicians I work with are on staff. So just, yeah.
Right. So they're not clinicians. They happen to have degrees.
We actually work with actual physicians. We have a number of MD PhDs. We do have a number of MD MPHs that do the public health They design our trials, they run our trials, so on and so forth. So I think the point that we're both trying to make is choose the advice correctly.
There you go.
Right? Choose advice correctly. You know, if they're not on the payroll, and sometimes free advice is the worst advice. And then don't try to make, like for example, I'm actually a software engineer. I don't know if you guys know it. The last thing you want is my medical advice because I'm not a physician. So don't ask a software engineer for medical advice. Sorry.
I would chime in there. I think you're both right. I'm kind of in the middle. You know, I think what they're both saying is similar, and that is you need to ultimately you need to find out who the decision maker is on the purchase. That's one very important factor, because whoever that decision making party is the one who has the power and the purse strings. But it's also, in order to assess the value of, let's say, a new technology, somebody who's actually using it, they might not be the decision maker, is an important, their input is important to see if it really provides the value you think it does.
And I violently agree with all three of you. Next question. Imaging applications in healthcare. What are the prospects for imaging startups? Any comment on that?
Yeah, so we've looked at imaging quite a bit over the years. There's some famous stories over the last 10 years about imaging startups being hamstrung by, you know, sort of the whole radiologist category there. You know, it's a broad term imaging. You know, if you've got a, you know, lower cost device, if you've got a way of enhancing the imaging story, you know, there's definitely portability and other elements that get interesting in that case. You know, a lot of the healthcare system has a significant amount of sunk cost in specific types of CXR, you know, as well as nuclear imaging, whether that's, you know, CT, MRI, et cetera. So, you know, when a hospital, which, you know, sadly are not very well funded, has made that $1 million investment and is going to be paying GE at least for, you know, the indefinite future on some of this hardware, getting anybody to stand up and listen is very difficult. If you can make these lightweight, interesting, low cost, if you can target areas like interventional radiology, that is an area in a category where you can get traction from the clinician side, you know, where they can, you know, do things faster, more efficiently. If you can save a hospital money, if you can reduce the amount of time their staff spends on something, those are all things that have historically gotten traction.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. On imaging, I wanted to bring up one interesting thing, and go back to Google again. They created software that can detect for mammograms, can detect breast cancer as well or better than human radiologists. But like you pointed out, you know, there's people who have their stakeholders in the hospital. Nobody wants to lose their job to an AI, and they had to point out how this technology would aid existing radiologists to do a better job and not replace them. And I think when you're entering a system that is, you know, like hospitals and other organizations, they can be very slow to change. And if you can find a way to take your product into a new market that isn't being served, that's outside, you know, an entrenched system, you can often make a lot more headway a lot faster with your startup.
And that's a great point, Steve. I mean, imaging centers, you know, outpatient imaging centers, you know, have really become the centerpiece of most, you know, most non-acute imaging out there today. You know, those are very profit-driven businesses. You know, so being able to fit into that business model, really understand all of their economics, and you know, show them that your product is going to somehow enhance that bottom line, I think it's going to get you a lot of traction.
Yeah, and I think, you know, just to add to my colleagues, I think most of the imaging that like I'd like to see more are more on the cell and the and on the molecular base. Perfect example of that is a company called Recursion. You should look them up. Essentially, it's a very interesting company that looks at different drug actions on a very high throughput level on a cell base. And I think their platform, last time I checked 3 years ago, uses images essentially to figure out how a cell responds to different drugs. So I think a lot of the imaging deals that I've seen in the past 6 months have always been focused on radiological. I think I've seen one that's a bit multi-omic, looking at CT scans, and they're correlating it with essentially clinical information. And I think that's a good way, basically, to what they're trying to do is they're trying to annotate it automated way, because I think one of the biggest problems with images in general is the amount of annotation required to basically train a neural network. So those would be great opportunities to see.
Okay, any tips on getting funded for a smart ventilator that uses IoT and AI? And I know what Steve's going to say, but I'm going to throw the question out there anyway.
Then I won't say it if you know it.
Well, so this is F. I mean, there is money out there for that. If this is something that can be, rapidly constructed using 3D printing or some other mechanism that can move the needle. I don't know if anybody's noticed, but even the Formula One teams of the world are contributing. Mercedes, AMG, Formula One team has actually got a ventilator, modification product that has been approved by, the, sort of National Health Service of the UK already. There are a number of physicians in Texas that have posted their, quad respirator system on Medium right now, which is, making its way through the entire healthcare world. I mean, if you've got a good story there and it makes a difference, there is dollars and cents. If you're in the state of Colorado, Brad Feld is heading up a huge chunk of change to be able to deploy in mass. The MAS Fund, MAS, out of LA is looking for stuff like that. Gates Foundation and Wellcome has spun up $100 million. So there is plenty of money out there if this is not a theoretical exercise. You can build this quickly. I would encourage you, if it's really, really, real time, contact Bloom Energy. I mean, Bloom Energy is literally building respirators in-house right now. That CEO can plug you into, if this is that meaningful, they are getting back to people. I mean, get this to the right person, and that will move.
Yeah, and I just read, and I'll read it to you, that the biotech startup Q Health just raised $13 million from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. That's another source of funding for you. And that was for a point-of-care COVID-19 test, but I'm sure they're funding ventilators too.
Yeah, certainly. And that's what I was talking about earlier. So the group there is called BARDA. That's like the equivalent of DARPA on the defense side. That is the research arm of that. The way that one approaches that, the CDC, NIH, get you to that level. They're giving away approximately $750,000 grants pretty easily. This is a supportive grant behind certain research and or applications there. It's usually a 70-30, 60-40 grant, which means the company either has to sponsor the remainder or they have to come up with the cash elsewhere to complete. There's plenty of capital out there, and there's plenty more behind it. But there are some low-hanging fruit. If this is real, if this is today, if you can show someone you can 3D print all the parts and put one together this afternoon, I encourage you to get in touch with the Bloom Energy folks. There's probably someone on LinkedIn in the biz dev department that you can get through pretty quickly, and that will rise very, very high up the food chain very quickly.
Great. Well, I don't see any other questions. Wait, one more here. Okay, last question is someone has asked if you could share how you got into investing in venture capital, I guess, particularly in health tech, because I think that's kind of that's a fairly, it takes a little bit of specialized knowledge to want to venture into that field. And with that, maybe also, as you're doing that, maybe each of you could give us like your final summarizing words here, and then we can wrap up. I want to start with you, Steve.
Okay. So as I mentioned, I was an entrepreneur. Then I started Founderspace, which is our incubator and accelerator. And that's what really led me into investing. But I invest broadly. I'm not just a health tech investor. I work with a lot of health tech companies, but I am more of a very early stage investor across all emerging technologies that are going to have an impact. And that's my background.
Any final words about investing in health tech right now you want to give us?
Well, I think health tech is here to stay. It's not like some of these other technologies that come and go. It's going to keep evolving. There's so much new potential out there. I'm always excited to hear from entrepreneurs what they're working on. I'm constantly reading about it myself and seeking out, professors at universities, researchers. I've been fortunate enough to meet a lot of Nobel Prize winners who tell me their ideas, and I just love this space. So if you have a business plan, want to submit it to Founderspace, you can go to founderspace.com, which is right above me, and click on our venture capital link and just submit it, and our team will go over it.
Okay, great. Ephraim?
Sure. Yeah, happy to tell you. So when I was an entrepreneur here in Silicon Valley, kind of founded and grew a very large media company. We were pioneers in what they call digital media, doing the first websites, CD-ROMs, interactive media, as well as even designing UI and UX for companies. One of our first customers dating back to 1988 was ADAC Labs, one of the first big imaging companies out there. A significant amount of our customer base was in the healthcare space. Ranging from technology to actual device side. We literally designed some of the user interfaces that went into a number of different imaging companies' software. So as the CEO of that company, you had to be a very broad generalist and understand when your sales team went out and closed big multi-million-dollar accounts, they expected to see the executive there. So I had to credibly speak about it. So I got to learn a lot, very little about a lot of things then. And then as a venture fund, this has always kind of been a part of our health and wellness component. We've sort of evolved in the digital health side. We are not a human health investor. We're a digital health investor, which is very important to understand, where those pieces, sort of shake out. We don't do drug discovery. We only work with what they call 510K FDA capable products. So there's a lot of, nuance and differentiation in the, healthcare, health tech, digital health side. Again, encourage you, check us out on Twitter, check us out on LinkedIn. I think just, looking at what we're talking about, what we're thinking about is incredibly helpful for entrepreneurs in terms of shaping where, venture minds are kind of going right now. Kind of puts you right into our partner meetings to a degree.
Okay. And Aldo?
Yeah, so as I did mention, my background is actually in software engineering. I do run a precision medicine high throughput AI company right now. I got into life sciences because of a great inspiration, but a terrible story. So I'm just letting everyone know. So my family was decimated by cancer. My mother succumbed to cancer in the 90s, and a lot of my immediate family had the same cancer. So it was an incredibly frustrating process. So I asked a lot of folks, experts, whether they were cancer biologists, they were biostatisticians, whether they were epidemiologists, and so that's also when my eyes broadened up. So I started a company. Then at the same time, I shifted all my investment activities into life sciences, just because of course, the tremendous problems and the tremendous opportunities. So my advice to folks, just as parting words, are, always start with a problem. Don't start with the solution. If there's a specific problem that needs to be solved, you work yourselves backwards. I find that a lot of entrepreneurs tend to find a really cool solution first, or a really cool hammer looking for nails to hit. So that's really helped me a lot when, always start with a very, very important problem. And, biology is extremely complex. That's why it's perfect for AI.
All right, well, thanks very much. I want to thank our panel for this presentation here. I want to thank the participants for tuning in, and thank you, Idea to IPO, for hosting this. We do this every week, as I said, so we'll be back again next week. So feel free to log on to the Idea to IPO discussion, our website, and you can join our discussion next week. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and conclude the webinar. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Take care now. Be safe.
Gentlemen.